Developer Retirement with Mark Dunn.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Each show brings you hard-hitting interviews with industry experts, innovating better methods, and sharing success stories. Listen on to learn how to increase quality, ship quickly, and operate well. And now your host, Jeffrey Palermo.
Welcome back to the show. I'm Jeffrey Palermo, your humble host. Make sure to check out www.azuredevops.show for past episodes and show notes. And I have the pleasure today of visiting with Mark Dunn. He's a longtime developer and software architect. He was the original co-host on the .NET Rocks podcast with Carl Franklin starting way back in 2002. And he has over 30 years of experience in the disciplines of software engineering, database administration, and project management. Software that Mark has developed for the radio industry is still in use today. And ever since around 2003, Mark has been awarded the Microsoft MVP Award, the Microsoft Most Valuable Professional status for his contributions to the Visual Studio and .NET community. And he served as a Microsoft Regional Director covering the Southeast United States from 2004 until 2017. And he became a Microsoft Certified Technical Trainer in 1995 and has traveled all over the world delivering training in the areas of .NET and database development, project management, and client-side development. But outside of the tech industry, Mark owns an Angus cattle farm in Alabama and is often found playing the drums. And also, I've dug up that Mark is a Microsoft certified trainer, application developer, solution developer for .NET, and database administrator. And I'm going to fill up the next 30 minutes just talking about his credentials. But Mark, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
Hey, Jeffrey, I'm doing great. It's a real pleasure to be on your show.
Oh, well, thanks. I know she didn't hit me with one of those I'm higher than the skin a cat jokes that you used to do.
I'm more excited than a chihuahua at Taco Bell.
There you go. That is awesome. Well, I'm really excited to interview you for this podcast because I started listening to your podcast actually in early 2003. So I think I missed the first episode, but there's so many people who've listened to you on that podcast. And of course, Carl's done a great job carrying .NET Rocks forward. But for those who are newer to the industry since then, and maybe not familiar with you, what's been the highlights of your career that you'd like to share as we get going?
Oh, wow, that's a tough question. Certainly .NET Rocks was one of them. Carl and I were both in the training business back then. I did a lot of training in Atlanta, and he was doing similar training up in Connecticut, New London. And, .NET Rocks started because we used to both like to listen to Car Talk on NPR. And one Saturday we were chatting and Carl said, do you think if we were to do some sort of a show on the internet, would anyone care to listen to it? And going back that far, there was nothing like this out there. There were no tech podcasts at that point that I'd ever seen. I'm not even sure the term podcasting was really used back then. I think one of the MTV VJs maybe got the name started. I'm not sure what his name was. But at any rate, though, Carl recorded the first show by himself because I was off somewhere teaching a remote class. And I think our second show, we had Dan Appleman come on, a mutual friend. I was always a fan of Dan's writing. And we went from there. So for a full year, I was the co-host of the show and really enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Now, there's a lot of developers who have gotten into the industry in the last 7 years as our industry explodes with growth, and it's often useful to have the perspective of what kinds of things were happening, a few decades ago. What was it like when you were starting out as a programmer?
Oh, well, when I really was starting out as a programmer, it was many decades ago. I remember in college, taking a Fortran class and taking a C++ class and learning those languages. And, I met my wife, wanted to get married. Her father is an old Navy man. He basically said, you better get a job before you marry my daughter. And I was in school at the time. So I was talking to a colleague, and he said, programmers do okay. I have a degree in physics, by the way, not programming. So I thought, okay, I'll give that a shot. So I went out, did some interviews. They were only hiring COBOL programmers back then. So I went to the university bookstore, bought a COBOL book, read it, took a COBOL test, somehow miraculously passed the COBOL test. And that's how I started working as a professional programmer. And someone took pity on me and didn't fire me the first week. He just told me, you obviously don't know what you're doing, but you're likable, so I'm going to help you out. And, he did.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I went from, doing COBOL on a mainframe. I did that for about a year and a half. And I learned, Quick Basic. I don't know if you remember Quick Basic. That may be before your time, but
it was my first language.
Oh, is that right? Well, mine was, I think, version 3. Do you remember that? Quick Basic version 3. It was DOS.
In all honesty, I think I was 13 and didn't pay attention to version numbers.
Oh, right. Okay. Sounds good to me. But my first version was version 3, and I learned it. I think I got a book from a publisher named Q that's not around anymore. But I learned Quick Basic. Went from doing mainframe programming to basically working on software in the radio industry. And that was great. I spent 7 years doing that, eventually transitioned from DOS software into Windows development using Visual Basic. And that's how I got to know Dan Appleman's book so well, because anything that Basic couldn't do out of the box, well, by golly, you could call the Windows API and usually get it done that way. And Dan's book was the roadmap to getting that stuff done. He wrote a book on I think it was called The Visual Basic Programmer's Guide to the Windows API.
Yeah.
Pour that thing out.
Wasn't that a decade, the 90s and the desktop development? I mean, everything was desktop, whether it was VB or Delphi. I mean, if you wrote software, it was for the Windows desktop largely.
It was up until, for me, about 1997, I want to say. And, I went to work for a company as a trainer and also did consulting. They were training and consulting company. So I got a chance to start working on not ASP.NET, but what we now consider classic ASP. Microsoft had a product they came out with named Visual InterDev. I don't know if anyone remembers that, but that goes way back. And that was an environment. Back then, you had 3 separate environments. You had, the Visual Basic environment. You had an environment for doing C++. And if you were a C++ programmer, you generally learned the Microsoft Foundation class libraries. And my good friend Jeff Precise wrote a book about that. If any of you old guys are out there, you'll remember Jeff's book on MFC. So, we dabbled in some of that, wrote DLLs and C++. Visual Basic DLLs were single-threaded and could cause performance problems in IIS servers. So there were certain things you would do in C++, and then other things that was fine to write in Basic, in Visual Basic. So did a lot of ASP development, and then ASP.NET and the .NET framework came along. So the company I worked for back then in Atlanta, Georgia, was a Microsoft Partner of the Year. I got to take a look at .NET when it was not even called .NET. This would have been around probably 1999.
ASP Plus, those
They
areas?
called it the Next Generation Windows System, NGWS, Next Generation Windows System. I remember that. And so I got to look at it pretty early and got to play around with the .NET framework as it stood way back then. And, some people think ASP.NET came out with it initially. It was really a couple of years later, like 2002. We got ASP.NET. And if you were a classic ASP programmer, ASP.NET was just like magic. It really was. It made things so easy. To me, it took, the ease of doing desktop development and brought that to the web. So if you were a desktop developer, it was a nice, easy transition over to doing web development. Through the toolbox, the form designer, web controls were awesome. And of course, everything now has changed. We do more MVC programming today. The pendulum has swung back toward having Java script skills, jQuery skills, knowing client libraries. So it's a lot different than it was, way back in the good old days.
In the good old days.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the good old days of writing a different version of your web application per browser.
Oh yeah. Let's not forget about that. That was really a problem. Bootstrap has made life much better.
Right.
I love Bootstrap.
Well, now you're semi-retired today, and you have kind of a goal. So what does a longtime programmer's retirement look like?
Well, I want to do something. There was a point back, I think I was around 47 or 48, that I took 6 months off. And I used to sit on my deck and smoke cigars and drink scotch every day. And it's hard to say that gets boring after a while, but it does. And I couldn't picture myself being a Walmart greeter. So I decided I would keep my hand in the training business. My son worked with me for a couple of years, and he's a technical sales engineer for a company that builds an AI web search engine that plugs into companies that have catalogs and things of that nature. So he does a tech job, but he really didn't want to be a programmer, and he really didn't like dealing with running a training company. So after a couple of years, he told me, I'd rather go do something else. And he was in Montgomery, Alabama, and his girlfriend was in Atlanta. So that was something that was hard to compete with. He wanted to be in Atlanta all the time. So he's back in Atlanta, and my training company mainly does work with state level government. And I, as I've gotten older, I don't like to get on airplanes anymore. So mostly I concentrate on doing work in the state of Alabama, some work in the state of Georgia. But that regionally, that's about, as far as I go. I work with 3 or 4 other trainers. If something comes up that, say a company in California wants us to do something, I'll usually ask one of those guys to go do a class there.
Okay. Well, what kinds of classes, what are the topics that you still involved in?
I just finished up teaching an ASP.NET MVC Core 3 class. That was a good class. We just about sold out every seat in it. Prior to that, I had done, a Transact SQL course. We have a course we call SQL Server for Developers. And it's really all about writing queries. And toward the end of it, it's about how you connect an app to a database, whether you go through ADO.NET or Entity Framework, and how to do things like call stored procedures. And I'm still a big fan of stored procs to do different things, just based on performance and security. So, other things that we teach, we've done SharePoint. SharePoint's kind of, slowed down over the years. We don't have as much of a demand for that topic anymore. We do have a bigger demand for things like DevOps, Pretty much all of our clients right now are using Azure DevOps. We've been big proponents in the state of Alabama of getting agencies to adopt Azure, and they really see the value of it compared to. I hate to say that one in particular was still using Visual Studio SourceSafe, but they were. Mm-hmm. And another one, their source code management was really a network share.
Yep.
And when someone had the project open, they let everyone else know via email, I've got the project right now. So only one of them was really working on the source code at any given time. That's the way we did things 20 years ago. But there's a better way today,
right,
that you can do that sort of thing. And really, it's not that hard to learn, and there's more. I mean, we're trying to grow them into to doing unit testing and getting into continuous integration, continuous build, and taking advantage of, a lot of the more advanced features for DevOps, deployment, let all that be managed by that environment. It does it so well.
The Azure DevOps Podcast is sponsored by ClearMeasure, a software engineering firm and Microsoft Gold partner, empowering development teams to be their best. ClearMeasure equips developers with the DevOps tools, methods, and automation necessary to focus on building their applications, rather than wrestling with builds, deployments, or environments. Click clear-measure.com to see whether a DevOps implementation is for you.
Hey, this is Jeffrey. Do you ever wonder if your software project is on the right path? It's really common for software projects to experience delays, to have the quality not where it needs to be, or have the team spending more time maintaining the software than you really should. In my practice, we know the challenges implementing all parts of DevOps, and it can make your head spin how many things you have to think about, and somewhere in your gut, you know that something's missing. So I've created a comprehensive 30-point DevOps inspection, reviewing your current process, methods, tools, source control, build integration, the various levels of testing, provisioning and maintaining environments, deploying, logging, telemetry, everything you need to think about in a high throughput, high productivity DevOps environment. And it really helps you gain peace of mind knowing that you're on the right track. And we are offering some more of our really popular 30-point DevOps inspections, and it's normally a $5,000 value, but I'm giving it away for free for my podcast listeners. Just send me an email, jeffrey@clear-measure.com. That's Jeffrey, and I'd be happy to inspect your existing DevOps environment, whether you use Azure DevOps Services, Octopus Deploy, TeamCity, any number of tools, because there are a lot out there. But what's important is that you have a complete and automated DevOps environment put together the right way. So get a second pair of eyes. Send me an email. Well, with the perspective of seeing so many paradigms of software, how has that colored your view of the modern DevOps movement? Because there's shiny toys and there's automate this, but with so many decades of experience, what are your rules of thumb? How do you explain it to your customers?
Well, if we're relying on people to do things all the time, sometimes the ball is going to get dropped, things are going to fall through cracks. Anything that I can automate. And I would say automate it in a way that it's logged as well, so I can go back and check and make sure that the job completed correctly. I'm a big fan of doing that because, it's faster generally. Something as simple as unit testing. One of our clients we had a couple of years ago had no concept of unit testing, and they had an ASP.NET Web Forms app. That had 207 web forms in it, and it was well over 1 million lines of source code. So whenever they made major changes to that system, and they went to publish it back out to production, the testing phase would take a couple of months. And you had a group of people basically manually testing this application, for fear of, changing, something in one module is going to break 3 or 4 other things in another module due to dependencies. And, integration testing and unit testing were revelations to them. Once we really showed them the value of that, how to use a mock framework, for instance. They'd never heard of a mock framework, dependency injection. Some of these things were big deals. And, it's difficult to do dependency injection with web forms, but you can still unit test the libraries. And part of the architecture that we showed them in refactoring that huge app, we reduced the code size by something like 40%.
Wow.
But we were able to write unit tests for the DLLs and be able to test their business logic. We were able to move a lot of things into a service layer and a data layer. So we had a separation of concerns like we strive to do in MVC, even though it was a web format. And we try to use Selenium, if you've heard of that, to do some UI testing. That proved to be a little more difficult than I thought it was going to be. It seemed like a great idea on the surface, but you start to try to do it, then it's like, oh gosh, this is kind of hard. But the unit testing part is not that hard to learn. I'll plug another book. An old time friend that we met doing .NET Rocks was a guy named Roy Oshervo, and Roy wrote a book on unit testing that it's just a fantastic book. I'd recommend anyone read it that wants to do unit testing. And even though you're probably not going to use today the unit testing tools he talks about in his book, the principles are there, how to write a good unit test.
Yeah, that book was The Art of Unit Testing.
That's it. That's exactly the book, The Art of Unit Testing. I've got it on a shelf here somewhere.
Yeah, that was a good book. I think at the time, you had that book on test-driven development, and then you had his book, similar time frame as a lot of Agile books coming out. And he wrote that book focused on C#.
Right, that's right. So one thing I do as a trainer is I read an awful lot of books.
I bet.
Yeah.
And how about authoring books?
I worked on a book with Karsten Thompson. It was the first book published on ADO.net way back around 2001, I think. And it was a lot of work for very little money. Is how I would describe it, and I know things are not better today because so much information is freely available over the internet. If I were looking at it today, my time would be much better spent maybe talking to Pluralsight or someone about doing a video. I believe. I'm also a big fan of video training, and I've used Pluralsight, I've used OneElect, I've used Udemy. Those are great resources. I would sometimes want to do that rather than read a book. But, I also buy books. Usually my bathroom has a stack of 5 or 6 books that are, Fortress of Solitude reading material.
Right. One user books, I call those.
That's right.
Now, if somebody sent a video crew out to your training courses, man, those would be awesome video courses just to record, because you teach this stuff, and so you've said the same lessons, or same things over and over again several times.
Right. Yeah, it's about 20% stand up and 80% training.
Well, yeah, the entertainment factor, keeping someone's attention so that they're engaged. I mean, that's a big part of it, isn't it?
It is, and I enjoy humor, so I'm going to make people laugh usually. I work so much in Alabama, they've heard all my material now. I have to come up with something new. Right.
Well, I do remember one of your jokes. It was, man, I am jacked up higher than a prom dress in a Georgia summer.
All Oh, it was higher than a prom dress in June. I think. I don't know what I said. That was completely improvisational.
Right.
And most of those were, because you would think, before I would do a show with Carl, I would sit down and seriously think, okay, what kind of analogy can I use this week? And I was busy, and I usually didn't. And Carl would go, how excited are you to be here this week? And I would have to come up with something. So
right.
A lot of those were just off the top of my head.
You were always the most excited person on the show.
And in reality, that was probably true, because I really, really enjoyed talking to, a lot of the different people we interviewed. I mean, it stands out that, to me, that we talked to Scott Guthrie. I really, really enjoyed that back when ASP.NET had first released, and such a big fan of that technology.
Yeah. And Scott Guthrie was a program manager on the ASP.NET team at that point.
Right. Yeah. I think he was considered, the father of ASP.NET. It was him and another guy whose name I don't remember now. But
Rob Howard?
I remember Rob Howard. There was another guy that was, I want to say his name was Mark something as well, but I just can't remember. It's been so long ago. I have senior moments now.
Well, if you were to fast forward, seeing so many generations of technology paradigms and what's going on today, what's likely to happen over the next 10 years in custom software?
Oh, it's hard to say. I mean, I remember thinking when I first saw Visual Basic that it's the end of programming as we know it, because just anybody's going to be able to get a copy of this and learn it in a weekend and be out there writing their own software. Mm-hmm. And really, if you think about it, Jeffrey, that didn't happen. In fact, we could argue that software development has become more and more complicated over time.
Can I throw a challenge to that?
Oh, yeah, sure. Go ahead.
I think that so many people could pick up a book and write the programs that we wrote way back then.
Oh, yeah.
But we just started
back then were more simple.
The ones, exactly. Read in a file, do some calculations, and then export something or show something on the screen. We just started demanding more and more of the custom applications.
It's true. It's true. You look at something like integrating with a product like BizTalk or integrating with SharePoint, and suddenly you have a bigger learning curve than you ever imagined.
Right.
I'd say just learning the language of C#. I mean, just think about learning not only the language fundamentals, but you're going to connect to a database. It's helpful if you know something about ADO.NET, but you really need to learn Entity Framework. If you start searching for examples somewhere, everything's going to be EF examples, if you think about it. You need to learn how Lambda expressions work, because you're going to encounter Lambda expressions almost everywhere, especially when dealing with writing link and integrating with Entity Framework. And, it's beyond just learning the basics of how do I do a loop? How do I create a variable? That stuff seems very fundamental, and it is. But these other things are becoming fundamental as well. You better know Entity Framework. You better understand link. Additional technologies that sit on top.
Well, how about you better know how to make something work on a smartphone?
Yeah, you should. That's right. It doesn't hurt to learn a little bit about Xamarin and certainly learning Bootstrap. I mean, at a bare minimum, you should have responsive design today in your apps if they're going to be web-based apps.
What I wonder is if the technology landscape is starting to contract after exploding. It was all desktop or just running headless on a server, and then it's web, but then web 2.0, and then web can run on all kinds of devices, and then the smartphone is like, oh, not just the smartphone. Now there's apps that run on your TV, and now there's apps and bots that run behind Alexa skills and Cortana and Google Home, and you have little bits of software running in a light bulb that's Wi-Fi connected. And and I'm wondering if we had this explosion of technology types and now it's all starting to consolidate again as far as the way you write the software and then just target it to run in different places.
Yeah, and I really like the idea of targeting something to run. Kind of the way Xamarin works with phones. You write something, and then you've got a compiler. You can compile it down to run specifically on an iPhone or an Android phone, and that seems like a good idea to me. I also like the idea of writing microservices and kind of treating them like Tinker Toys, where you assemble the things together that you need. You build a pipeline to achieve, the connection between the client and whatever server you want. Love that idea too. Love the idea of containers, the idea of doing things in Azure and having all your services up there. These things just make sense to me. It removes the worry of, running your own servers. And that's expensive, and I really try to argue with clients that if they adopt Azure in the long run, it's going to wind up saving them money. And usually if you put pencil to paper, you can prove that.
Well, Mark, what's your plan over the next few years and then executing the retirement transition?
Well, you mentioned in my bio that, I own a cattle farm. We've expanded that somewhat. I just bought 200 more acres to add to the farm last year. So we're up to 585 acres at this point, and about 175 Black Angus cattle. Our cattle are all grass-fed. They're steroid-free. It's something my mother told me a long time ago when I was a boy, that you may leave the farm one day, but, you're going to be, called back to it and want to be a farmer. That's sort of true and sort of not true. I financially invest in the farm, but my family, my nephew and my brother and his wife do most of the work on the farm. So I'm really not the guy to put the boots on and get out there and do stuff with cows, especially when it comes to birthing calves. You won't see me anywhere near that process.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. But, we do some other things. My sister-in-law, brother's wife, grows daylilies. We have a 3-acre daylily farm.
Oh, nice.
And, she does festivals every year. A couple of thousand people usually come out for the daylily festivals, and she's a great cook. So she makes these deep fried pies, coconut, chocolate, apple, peach, pecan pies, and they sell a lot of pies. So aside from raising cattle, they're in the business of making pies and growing daylilies as well. Who would have thunk it?
Yeah, exactly. Well, how long do you think that you'll keep up your mentoring service?
Oh, probably another 3 years. My wife gets tired of me being gone a couple of weeks a month. Like I said, right now I work an average of 11 days a month, and I always take the month of December off. I very rarely ever work during the month of December. That's not a bad schedule to keep. The time that I have off, I just enjoy reading. I tinker around with playing my drums. I'm a big Rush fan. I think I'm wearing a Rush t-shirt right now. Hated that Neil Peart passed away a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you heard about that. But, that was very sad. I was a big fan of his drumming, and something I aspire to play like him, but probably will never get there. He was probably the greatest drummer around until he passed away. Yeah,
I think I haven't heard anything more impressive than his work there.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't play drums.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you don't have to be a drummer to sort of appreciate, wow, that's pretty complex what he's doing.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, retirement just gives you the opportunity to, do exactly what you want to do. And I'd like to do more traveling as far as, just vacation type of stuff. We're not sure that I really want to go to other countries right now at all, but, last December, my wife and I spent 2 weeks up in South Carolina, Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, and just thoroughly enjoyed it. That was so much fun. We're renting a beach house up there. In December, of course, it's an off time of the year. But we love just hanging out, visiting restaurants, meeting people. I never meet a stranger. I love to talk to anybody that takes time to talk.
Yeah. About
almost anything.
Awesome. Well, is there any parting advice that you would give to newer programmers to have a career with a successful trajectory?
Sure. We're all very fortunate. I'm a very patriotic person. I love America. We live in a country with such incredible opportunity here. And, there's nothing stopping you. I always say if you like to solve puzzles, you could probably be a good programmer because, if you've got logic, you have a logical mind. Not everyone does. I've had some students that, I was like, programming might not be the thing you want to do. And it's certainly true. It's not something everybody's cut out to do. And, if you like programming, my gosh, we work in a fantastic industry. You can get a job. The economy's booming right now. I know Atlanta is a fantastic market. Even Montgomery, Alabama, where I sit right now, there's several jobs open for architects, senior developers, business analysts. You don't have to be a programmer. There are other types of jobs out there. I taught my son to start programming when he was like 12 years old. And by the time he was 16, he just was burned out. He told me, he's like, I'm not going to be a programmer. I'm not a guy that wants to sit around and sit behind a desk. And he really isn't. I mean, he's in a job where he gets to meet with customers. He gets to get up and move around. And he likes that. So, find something you enjoy. There are jobs out there in the tech industry that offer, the ability to get outside the dark room that people slide pizza under the door and ask you just to write code 20 hours a day. Some people love a job like that. I've certainly done it for many years. It didn't bother me at all to write code, 12 hours a day.
Yeah, me either. Those are just getting in the zone. Oh, shoot, did another 6 hours just go by?
Yeah, it looks like we got a little message popping up here.
So, all right. Well, hey, Mark, I really appreciate the time. And this was a great interview. I personally enjoyed it, having listened to you on .NET Rocks way back in the day. And I've followed your work over the last couple of decades myself. And so thanks for coming on the show.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. And until next time, keep shipping.
You've been listening to the Azure DevOps Podcast, a show for developers and DevOps professionals shipping software using Microsoft technologies. Go to www.azuredevops.show for show notes and other episodes. On behalf of your host, Jeffrey Palermo, and our sponsors, thanks for listening, and may God bless you.